Hi, Congressman Schweikert.
Schweikert and just
Schweikert.
David. Just David.
Okay.
One of the reasons I'm happy to do this is you're one of the few people I've actually seen some of the podcasts and those things where you're willing to do hard stuff and
Yes.
technical stuff.
I'm an engineer background.
Which you realize how unique that makes you.
Yes.
You're good at math.
Yes. We're both kind of math focused. I know you budget, you're really interested in math.
Yeah, as my wife says, I'm sort of an accountant on steroids.
But we shouldn't have congressmen that are all lawyers. We should have some accountants, engineers, doctors, like all the professions. And we should even have some skilled tradesmen and all the other, so we have a more diverse point of view.
Well, I would argue the elegance of what the Founding Fathers did is a concept of this incredible diversity. But particularly over the last 50, 60 years, the federal government has taken over far too much of our lives and far too much of the responsibilities it should be at the state level. With that comes lots of complexity. Actually, I want to do housing policy because A, you're really good at it, and B, I'm more of a classical economist on housing. It's actually, one of the things, one of my, when we all do our bachelor's, originally I wanted to do statistics. I wasn't as smart as I wanted to be, but I ended up doing finance, and then because I liked housing, I also did the housing program.
Interesting.
And having been someone who's invested a lot of people's money over the decades in buying houses, doing little developments, those things, I have more of a classic view on how you deal with affordability and just availability. And look, you've actually talked about, the engineering, what actually produces access to housing and just the availability. And I think that's brilliant, because if I came to someone smart like you and said, all right, what are the two primary factors of housing affordability? It's availability, and oddly enough, I would say wage growth. Because the way we debt finance houses is, when we all bought our last house, we probably maxed it out. Hey, I'm right there at the edge. I'm buying the most house I possibly can. The mortgage broker or my bank is saying, okay, you're right there on the cusp of as big a loan as you can get, because if you give me that loan, I can actually, do the repair, I can fix the garage, I can do this and that. But they're looking at you saying, okay, you have a stable job, and we can see that wage growth in this market is going up. So we know a year from now, 2 years from now, it actually becomes more
payments will be
and
easier.
more. Exactly. But you got to have product. And it's a real concern we have to have with many of our brothers and sisters out there on the availability side. I want my kids to be able to buy a house, long as it's not in my neighborhood. Or that vacant lot over there, I think should be a park.
Yes.
Instead of homes. In the enabling documents that allowed us to become Arizona, in our state constitution, so this isn't feelings, this isn't a law, this is our constitution and the charter for Arizona in our agreement with the federal government to become a state. Here's all this land that was granted to the Arizona State Trust for the benefit of education. That's all it can be used for. So when you lease this piece of land to cattle ranchers, or we actually have some land we lease and they actually have office buildings on it, because that turned out to be the most valuable cash flow. Or these are allowed to be master planned, which I think actually needs a fix. There's too much stalling in that part. But you look at areas like around the city of Phoenix or some of our metropolitan areas, go look at an ownership map. There's even pieces of government property almost in what you would consider the central city.
Yeah, there's like a big chunk in the middle of the Santan Valley. Everything's developing around it, like this big empty lot.
But you realize from an economist standpoint, from even a municipal planning, that's absurd. I'm going to move sewer, water, these things. I'm going to pay to move them all the way over here. I'm going to move the roads over, and not sort of visualize a continuity of, we're going to build our homes in an efficient fashion
Yes.
So, because when you do that leapfrogging, you actually end up creating cost for the people that already live there. Hey, your property taxes, your city spending has to go up because we had to run the sewer an extra mile to get to the next subdivision because the state trust land didn't succeed in following their own rules and getting this property auctioned. So people forget that leapfrog costs you and I money.
Oh, I understand that. But
Well, yeah, but you're an engineer, so.
But why do we even have that problem? Why can't the state just sell that land and?
It's leadership.
Oh well, okay.
Look, and there's some ways you play some games with it. Hey, I'm going to turn in an application on this piece of state trust land, and in that application, I'm going to ask for I want to be the master planner of it, and then you use that sometimes to stall and control the property and design it, and you find in some of these master plans there were home builders. Others who would have bought the property and started to put it into production lots and next generation of single family homes. But the master planner, it ends up sitting in planning. Sometimes I can show you one that's been under master planning, I think a decade.
So is it competing developers who just want to lock up the land
Well,
of their competitors, or is it the planning review, like the bureaucrats?
It's a combination of everything. And understand, if you've been around that part of the real estate world, they're different professions.
Yes.
We do lots. We build things. We lay infrastructure. We finance mezzanine. So we have some businesses here in town that don't build homes, they don't subdivide lots, but they finance the sewer, the water, the electricity, the curbs, the asphalt. They put all that in, and then as you sell the lot, you pay them back their portion of the infrastructure they financed. So there's this whole hierarchy of people that want to plan, want to subdivide, and then you have all the lawyers over here, and those who are doing what we call entitlements. What's my density I can get on this? And then you have some very more controversial things. Because this is state land, the state can actually, it's been threatened. I don't think it's actually been done in modern times, but it has been threatened, saying, city, you're being a jerk. We're going to come in and force this, because it's state land, we can say the density that goes on this piece of land. And where the city is saying, I don't want that type of density. You always have to find a happy medium. And then we have to deal with the incumbency problem. Incumbency problem is the classic economics of, I love housing as long as I just got mine. And shortage, scarcity.
Ah, yes.
Scarcity raises my value.
But that's one generation benefiting from screwing the next younger generation.
There is what we call generational wealth transfer because of that. And then you actually ends up, there's actually some great economic papers, if you really want to geek out, that in some ways that actually hurts you more than you might think.
Hurts who?
It hurts the incumbent, the incumbent homeowner, incumbent family, because you no longer have the economic growth. The house is the house. But there's the cascade of, I now have employees. I have workers. I have people from my school district. I have people going to my church. I have a new doctor in the neighborhood. All those economic cascades that come by those people being part of your community. So yes, your house may go up in value, but everything else
costs
more scarcity and therefore costs more. So, and it's hard to get in front of a room and do a whiteboard. And I've tried to do this a couple of times, saying, when you actually have, you may be in this subdivision over here, they're going to build, true middle class homes. But when you want your air conditioner repaired and they're within your zip code, it's a lot easier. Or when you need a school teacher, or when you need all the things that create a community, create a functioning, society. And it turns out the free market really is the most elegant allocation of value, wealth, and growth. And right now we've completely distorted it, particularly here in Arizona.
Yes. I would say a well-regulated, minimal, but you don't want cheaters, monopolists, all kind of thing. But as long as you do that.
Yeah, but we already have cheaters, monopolists, oligopolists.
But they're rigging the system the other way.
And they use the bureaucracy too. I have a love of technology. We have sat down with some freaky smart people and said, there's some experiments going on around the world where you design your property. Or let's just use a house because it's as simple as, all right, let's say you want to do a garage addition. Let's just make it a real simple example. Here's your plans. You've done it on your computer, or you hit the button and you send it into the municipality. And within seconds, their software looks at it and goes, okay, we're going to redline it. You have to put in, you need a bigger electrical panel box, and you need more GFIs here. Boom, sends you that back and say, here's your building permit. You have to build to these codes. You realize you could start doing building permits within seconds, not months, not weeks. I had one. This is 18 years ago, before I ended up in Congress, and it took months because we had a grade issue and all these things, but a data set would have seen it and done. But we had these guys trying to calculate it by hand, and they kept screwing up. How much money would be saved? How much more efficient, instead of the money going to interest, and I'm sorry, bureaucrats and other things, use the technology to make life simpler. And then, okay, your garage addition fits. Here's your owner, builder, or contractor. So do you need a Department of Revenue, tax certificate for this? You're in an area where you may need a dust certificate if it's something bigger, from the county. But all those can be done instantly. Why not start to embrace that type of technology? Now, it's going to annoy some of the people that make their living in the bureaucracy.
Yes.
But it would be better for society because those aren't costs that actually grow the economy. They actually slow prosperity down.
Yes, there's a lot of that.
So, the concept of 1 minute permitting, we have the technology. Why not give it a try? That's a really interesting, because, if you stop and take a step back, we're there. We can do this now.
We can do it very quickly, very soon. I would like to talk about making the government overall state, but more efficient. But let's focus on this for a little bit right now. So, for example, you're saying that sometimes the cities don't want growth, the neighbors don't want development because it would lower the home values. But you have state land, and let's say you have a big tract of state land, like east of Mesa, Apache Junction, that huge chunk out there.
There's huge chunks over there. Come up here where Desert Ridge is. You skip up, and we need for Taiwan Semiconductor, the employees. There's now experiments being done on an app where you walk into and say, okay, I'm at the framing stage, and you use the phone, and the AI says, yes, your studs and all those are performing. Then you come back and you do your electrical and your plumbing. What happens when you can use a scanned AI as your building inspector?
Wow. Faster,
better, cheaper.
Yeah.
And so now you're starting to deal with sort of the mechanical side. Now we have some of the tougher. Okay, back to our thought experiments on land itself, because it's not just state trust land.
There's federal land. BLM land would be a great example.
Have you ever driven on Camelback Road?
Which Camelback? Yes.
Camelback. Okay, if you go like Camelback and 40th Street, north side, there's this really fancy restaurant. I've only gotten to eat there like once or twice because it's way out of my budget.
Yes.
I think it's called Vincent's.
I haven't been to that.
Fancy restaurant. And then there's like an office building here and this. And do you know that's owned by the Bureau of Reclamation?
Interesting.
Prime real estate in north central Phoenix. You have these sorts of things throughout the West because the way we grew. That behind it is, I think, the Arizona Canal. I may have the name wrong, but somehow I think that may have been an office for the Bureau of Reclamation 70 years ago.
Yeah, it was a little office in the desert somewhere.
And it's still owned. You actually have that. So, and understand, there's a world of difference between Forest Service land and BLM land. Forest Service land was the land that the Park Service and those wanted. BLM was the stuff they said, that has almost no real value for preservation of animals and livestock and this, that. But go, for anyone that's watching this, go to the state land department. They do actually have some great maps. You can find them right there on their website, and hit the one that says Arizona ownership. And you can see it's crazy town. Here's a strip of BLM land, and all around it are houses. You know, here's a piece of state trust land, and then you can see the leapfrog of the development. You will even see some Bureau of Reclamation land that, and 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we were doing some really neat experiments of, hey, we're gonna make that a park. You know, we need that for drainage retention. Hey, this is, you know, a little spot where they're flying model airplanes. Over here, they have equestrian. And somehow those sort of creative ideas have started to fade. And we need to sort of drive those back into how we do land planning, municipal planning. And much of that really belongs at the local and the county level. The state just has to sort of set a rational, fair way to get these in private hands so we actually have the economic opportunity.
I agree. What I was trying to say is, one of the projects I worked on when I was working for developers as an engineer is we were building whole new, almost cities, 10,000 homes. You can imagine, it's like 30,000 people on the edge, and it was ranch land or whatever. So you have this huge tract of state land just beyond the existing cities, and they tend to sell one lot at a time to developers, but it goes to the existing city. But if the existing cities don't want to grow, but the state says, okay, we need housing, we own this land, we'll just create an entirely new city. It has its own city government, but it's all on state land. The state controls it until it's built. Like the developer just builds the whole thing, and then it's all sold out.
You're going to find most cities want it.
Okay.
Because they want it in their tax base.
Yeah.
Why that's important is, as you have growth, there used to be this belief is that growth had a transfer cost to incumbent houses. It doesn't anymore if you do it right. And we do most of that here in Arizona. You're the developer. You have to pay for the water, the sewer, the street, and then there's actually things even with the Corporation Commission rules where you're the private water company, or even the power company. You make the developer pay for it, and then as utilization comes in, you slowly get back for the money for the infrastructure part. And it's more of a financing mechanism to make sure that those financing costs don't end up on your current residents. And we're good at that now. We know how to not have the transfer costs.
All this is interesting and good, and I think this is a problem, but it's not the biggest problem. It's manageable. We can fix it.
Yeah.
To me, at least in Arizona, the biggest, and I think other states might have a similar problem, but I think the biggest problem is water. The issue is there's no water. We can't build any more houses. Well, I don't think that's true.
It's not true. But I actually ask you, and it's harder to get your head around this, to think more of a unified theory.
Okay.
It's water, but it's also where that water is. You'll hear some people say wet water, paper water. Okay, so I have, groundwater rights. There's some surface water over here, but my homes and housing need is over here. How do I get it there? Water is actually has some real tricky things, and let's first lay out some honesty. I love agriculture. In some ways it's sort of, being a kid who grew up here in town, you'd go out to, Coolidge and go see the cotton gin, all these things. But you do realize about, I think the last report I read was saying about 47% of Arizona's water actually goes to crops that are used for cattle feed.
Yes, and that outrages me. Not only is it used for cattle feed here, but the cattle feed is exported.
Some of it is exported, but if you do the hay and the alfalfa and those things, some's exported. But even for those of us in the Southwest, about 47%. It's both. It makes you go, I love my steak, but it turns out there's opportunities in that. We're actually playing this sort of gamifying water in my office, and partially even for the campaign. But we're trying to come up with the 100 things you can do. And we're forcing ourselves to get to 100. We're not at 100 yet. So if anyone has a suggestion, send it to it. But we're doing everything from, at the top was new infrastructure. Hey, another dam on the Salt River, or a diversion dam. So like 3 times in the last decade, we've sent water down the Salt River functionally to, Red Rock and all the way down to Yuma. And we could have captured that. You have to do a settlement, I guess is the better way. And then where the siphon is, let it go down to Pima County. And so you could have actually swapped and then left the CAP water in Lake Pleasant. Well, that's going to cost $140 million. But there's ideas like that's infrastructure. So that may be way up here. Then little things down here of, hey, we're incentivize low water yield plants. What was crazy is, what we think is in the middle?
What?
The leaky pipes.
Ah.
You, in Tucson, Yuma, Phoenix, some of the pipes that are 60, 70, 100 years old. We're looking at some data. They leak like crazy, but they're really expensive to dig up and fix. And so you're trying to build a combination of, here's where you actually can affect water resources, and then here's where it costs. And so you're constantly doing this balance of, because some of the ideas cost nothing, but they might have some impact. Some cost a fortune, don't. Like, I love desalinization. There's some new desalinization technology that's amazingly good, but its cost is still outlandish. It would be cheaper to actually, in many ways, take someone who has water rights, it's part of their bundle of rights, and lease or buy some of those.
Yes.
Than it is to do the desalinization. I'd like a much more visible water market.
Yes.
The fact of the matter is, okay, so this dairy interest now is going to buy the farms around them as a way to deal with potential litigation on the groundwater. Okay. Do we need to have that at the Department of Water Resources where we see it on the board? Should Department of Water Resources or even a private sector saying, look, we're going to have at least a high level of visibility of this subdivision has to buy some additional water credits or water rights to meet their 100-year assured water supply. Mm-hmm. How do I see it? How do I see the market? Is it just a piece of paper that gets filed eventually at Department of Water Resources? And is that the right market price? But that's me being more of a classic free market supply side economist. Mm-hmm. But I also think that visibility might help us also sort of assure the public, the investors, the new jobs that we're trying to bring into the state. That we're trying to grab every good job out of California and bring them here so we can. Because remember, we're stagnant now on our wages. Mm-hmm. We're like number 4 from the bottom on our wage growth. A couple months ago, we lost 5,000 private sector jobs. Things are actually in some ways economically much worse in Arizona than folks understand. We need to recruit these businesses to come here. You have to demonstrate, hey, we have our act together as part of that recruitment.
Yes. So here are my suggestions, and you probably won't even like all of them, but the range of ideas I've had for reallocating the water we have and then getting additional water resources. And based on some analysis I've done with Grok and other things, I think these are, better things, or more reasonable, economical, viable things. So one is you just flat out ban using any irrigated water for any export cheap commodity crop. We are not going to use our water to grow alfalfa to send to communist China to feed in communist leader states.
Viscerally, I love that. We also have to be very careful we're not violating someone's private property rights, their Fifth Amendment property rights from the U.S. Constitution. Now, there's other ways to do it. You say, hey, there's, if you're going to do this, there's certain export fees. So you do it on the cost of it. You never sever someone's constitutional rights. So,
well, we do ban export of certain chips and all.
Yeah, but that's, and you can do you can make a security argument.
Yes.
But I'm there with you. I just want to make sure we do it in a constitutional
Sure,
fashion.
of course. Okay, then the other idea is, obviously there's allocation among states. Should California really have the majority of the
Oh yeah, and you saw I introduced a bill a little while. In some ways it's, forgive me, a screw you California bill. But it's not 70 years ago when California gets to have, the number one priority and Arizona's the very bottom. We now have like 7.7 million people here. We should stop feeling, acting, and have the law make Arizona the stepchild of California.
And Nevada too. And California thinks they're entitled to all this water. But the thing is, they have access to the Pacific Ocean. They can do all the desalination they want. They flush a bunch of Sacramento River water into the ocean. That they already built the aqueducts and pipelines, everything to move that water. They just choose not to. They choose to take Colorado River water, which is basically our only source.
They have remarkable amounts of water resources. It's the Sierras, if they would raise Shasta Dam. About 30, 40 years ago, there was a vote in California for something called the Peripheral Canal.
Yes.
They were going to take some of those water resources and run them. Southern California voted for it. Northern California said, screw you.
Yes, they're regional within the state.
Remember, one of the things I have to deal with in Congress is every fifth door is a member from California. Because of their population, their dynamics, and God forbid they ever all started working with each other. They would be dangerous.
No, they're too divided for that.
But the reality of it is you're going the right direction. Is there a world coming where we're going to defend agriculture, we're going to defend our food and fiber, but we're going to do it in a way where we may have to encourage, I despise subsidies, but incentivize, use this new type of hay. There's like I'm going to call it a GMO, but it's technically a splicing of some existing
hybrid or
hays.
something.
Yeah, but it uses much less water.
Okay.
And I'm told, look, there's an experiment going on right now. You want to know what's the most efficient grower of water and sort of the oils and the proteins that you'd have for cow? It's types of algae.
Yeah, okay.
Dramatically less water. So do you actually say, if you're growing this type of crop, we're going to do these things in our federal and state tax system, or those things, and try to create those rotations. If 47% of our water is going to to cattle feed, could we actually create more diversity in that? Now you got to work with the cattle growers, because I want my steak still to be tasty and my cows to produce my milk. But look, you're one of the few people who've paid attention to, there is a hierarchy.
Yes.
And there's ways to make this work.
Well, there's the other argument, the more capital-free market allocation that says we should just get rid of all the water rights and just have all the water auctioned and whatever the price is and let the market reign. I've heard there's legal problems makes that difficult to
because
transition.
remember, many of these water rights belong to the real estate, and therefore it's a property right. And Arizona has very good condemnation laws, both from our state constitution we even have something called an inverse condemnation, saying, hey, if you think they're going to come try to take it, you can force them to take it so you don't have the stigma on you.
Yes.
Respect the Constitution. That's always one of my number one rules of life is the Founding Fathers were divinely inspired. Respect it.
Okay, but then I did some more research and figured out a workaround, and I think it's very simple. If it's a property, you can tax it with a property tax. Very simple. We do that with land all the time.
Yeah.
Hear me out.
Okay.
You charge a really low rate for water tax, property tax, whatever it is, or water use or right, whatever it is. It's low enough that water efficient farmers aren't really hurt that much. It's really the water wasting farmers that are hurt the most. And you give a personal exemption per person. So households basically never ever pay it because their personal exemption's high enough they would never pay it. But you can set a really low amount because if agriculture, they use such a huge amount that even a small tax would create an incentive.
But you already do that in a bunch of Arizona in water pricing. From you and I as a residential customer, most folks don't realize half or more than half of your water bill is actually electricity. Because it has to be lifted up, then it has to be down, then it has to be pressurized. So like Central Arizona Project, the most of the fees we have to pay there is electricity. If you're in Tucson, they actually have graduated pricing as you go up in elevation. Because if you're the person up on the top of the San Canalinas
it costs a lot more money to get you your water because of the electricity to pump it up there.
Yes.
So, and look, you're sounding like a price economist, which is actually what Milton Friedman was.
Yes.
In some ways, that pricing is the signal of, do I respect the commodity or do I not respect it? If something is free,
Gets wasted.
you gets wasted. But you want to make sure that you're not also creating certain distortions where someone's able to create an arbitrage where they play games with it.